Macropsia is a name given to a neurological condition whereby somewhere in between the eye and the brain, something glitches and the objects around you are made to appear much larger than they actually are. And so you yourself, in comparison, seem much smaller. Macropsia is also called Alice in Wonderland syndrome, which is appropriate. It's sort of effectively what happens if you drink the little drink me bottle. What this means in musical terms is that this is a piece about morphing perspectives of scale. Sounds which at first seem very fragile, very inconsequential and almost worthless are sort of multiplied through the scale of orchestral forces and snowball into volumes which suddenly seem very monstrous, very difficult to manage, and in that sense even threatening. Nowhere is this discrepancy of scale more vividly modelled than by bugs and by the insect world, in the same way that one insect seems thoroughly squishable and completely benign, but if you have a whole swarm of them, then things start to get a little apocalyptic. In writing this piece, I wanted to turn the orchestra into a swarm of insects and really unleash the huge textural complexity that is available when you have 50 string players. Each one of them in this piece is playing similar material, but all slightly differently and slightly at a different time, so that the cumulative effect is very much of a swarm. I wrote this piece almost 18 months ago now, and at the time I was thinking about bugs and about insects. But in retrospect, I can't help but wonder if this swarm aesthetic has a different kind of relevance and resonance in a time of mass information, when the world is operating on mass, through mass distribution, mass production, mass manufacturing, mass communication, and mass information. Kind of makes me wonder what is the continued relevance or worth of one single voice? Or are we increasingly making sense of the world through this lens of a mass aesthetic? Having said that though, what's interesting about the insect swarm is that yes, thousands, tens of thousands of insects can move in these big, elegant shapes, and yet there are always a few stragglers. The shapes are not precisely drawn, and that's also something I wanted to capture in this piece, a kind of a sense of looseness. There's always the odd sort of lame leg or two that's twitching in the background, these kind of sketchy pencil lines that are just cluttering up the bigger shapes ever so slightly. Another thing that drew me to bugs is the way in which they are at once repulsive but also fascinating. They're kind of abject and icky, and they make you want to run out of a room, and yet you also can't take your eyes off them. They're so strange and alien, and so in finding sounds for this piece, I wanted to find sounds that were quite grating, that did almost provoke a kind of a physical reaction in the listener, like fingernails on a chalkboard, but at the same time could turn on a dime into being quite strangely beautiful if you just listen to them long enough, in the same way that if you look at a bug for long enough, they can be hypnotizing. Probably the biggest challenge this piece presented was getting an orchestra to play it, because the material is quite unusual in the context of orchestral repertoire. In my scavenger hunt for sounds that are weird and wonderful, I end up asking the players to do pretty much everything except for playing their instruments in the manner to which they are accustomed. The score is not sight-readable, and neither are the parts. For that reason, then, I'm extremely grateful to the two orchestras who have performed this piece, the Auckland Philharmonia, for whom it was written, and the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra, who recorded it at the Todd Readings. The fact that both of these orchestras elected to tackle the piece, to me, demonstrates a really genuine commitment they have in championing the work of young New Zealand composers. And not just in a way that pays lip service to the idea by programming works that are convenient to the orchestra to play, to sight read, but genuinely to realising whatever it is that young composers want to write, and whatever directions that young composers want to push the orchestra in, which is, as I say, it's a huge vote of confidence from the management of these orchestras and also from the players. The thing about my piece is that, the second violin part, one of the two second violin parts, does not look like much on the page, there's not a lot of information there because the music is in a mass effect, and the players of both orchestras really, I really appreciate the trust that they showed in committing to what was on the page, and creating a really spectacular effect. The SOUNZ Contemporary Award has always been one of many channels that recognise the huge richness and quality and integrity of work being done in New Zealand. And that community of New Zealand composers, right throughout multiple generations, has always been a huge source of nourishment to me as a composer, both creatively and personally as well. And so to receive this nomination and to see one's work in the company of that work and those composers whom I hugely admire and respect, that is very encouraging. I'm always thrilled to see the strong representation of younger composers in the SOUNZ Contemporary Award lineup. I think it's an apt recognition of the huge contribution that young composers make to the kind of artistic vibrancy of things in New Zealand. And so I'm really encouraged by this nomination to just keep going further.